What's going on YouTube? This is Wraith Designs with another video. Today I'm going to be showing off a modular interior set that I've created yesterday. I used it for self-teaching purposes. I know I could use programs like Revit or AutoCAD, things like that to kind of help me make a more realistic interior, but for the sake of self-teaching and showing the rest of the world, I created this by hand in 3ds Max. Now I've watched a bunch of tutorials online to show you how to do this. This is actually a pretty good setup. So if you're new to the concept, I would advise that you learn by doing it by hand in 3ds Max. So this way, if you ever use something like Revit or AutoCAD and you took models from that and you wanted to edit something about it or change it, this will help you understand what you need to do to create those model pieces. So here, as you can see, I have a few pieces, corner pieces, inward, outward, window pieces, straight wall, doorway. Okay, so I just made sure that I set up my grid to match the default of Unreal Engine 4. So that's centimeters, 1 centimeter equals 1 Unreal Engine unit. So when you set that up, you want to make sure the grid matches by default. Now you can change this if you want, but I'm just showing people for the sake of learning. If you open up Unreal Engine here, as you can see, I have it by default, it's 10. Now you can set it to 5 if you want. You can do that, and you can do it in 3ds Max, but it's always good to kind of have them match. So if you're planning to use something like 5 or 1, then set up 3ds Max accordingly. You could always up it so it doesn't have to, be exactly, but as long as one can go into the other, properly, that's fine. I like to stick with 5 or 10. So as you can see, that's what that is. Now if you go over to the side here, you can see that this grid is set up the same way. So this will snap for every 10. So these are 10 centimeters. That's basically what it's saying. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's what that is. So every 10 of these as well will be the snap point. So I have that set up in 3ds Max the same way. I'm going to show you how to do the setup right now. So if you want to set up your grid properly, there's a few steps you're going to learn right here under unit setup. You want to make sure that it's set to metric and centimeters. You also want to go under system unit setup and make sure that your system unit scale, 1 unit equals 1 centimeter, so 1.0 centimeters. Now you don't have to mess with any of this. This is fine. You just want to keep it there. Those two are set up, but one extra step to make sure that your grid matches Unreal Engine. I'm going to do this right now. You come up to Angle Snap Toggle, right click, a menu will pop up. You go under Snaps. You want to make sure it's snapped on grid points. You can change other snaps for what you're doing. You'll kind of figure that out as you go along. But for now, I'm going to show you how to set up the home grid. So I have the grid spacing every 10 centimeters, just like Unreal Engine 4. Also, major lines every 10 units. So that would be each unit's 10 centimeters. So every 100 centimeters will be a line. So as you can see, kind of vaguely, the lighter lines right here. You can change the colors of them too. But just keep in mind that I have that set up the same way, kind of going around here, and the black lines here are the middle of the grid. Now I have the perspective view really high because I have all my pieces here, but naturally you can keep it to 10, which will actually be really small. As you can see, that would be boom boom. So one of these squares here in between the large black lines is exactly the same as these. So if you think of the grid in 3ds Max, it's one of these areas. So that's the entire grid we have visible right now in 3ds Max. If you want to expand it farther like you see here, again, that's what you would do right here, perspective view, grid extent. So I'm going to set that back to 200 just for the sake of this tutorial. No, I do not want 1200. Maybe $1,200, that'd be great. Anyway, so we have that set up. You want to make sure that you also have a reference to your player scale, being like the width and height collision wise. This way you can create your modular pieces properly, and you have a reference to your player character, so when you're in game it should look the way it's supposed to look. Not just to make sure that, yeah, okay, I got all the units set up and the grid set up. You want to make sure that when you're in game first person or third person, it looks proper. So I actually did that. I looked up on level of World of Level Design, I think it was called, the Facebook page, and they're a company that does a lot of this, uh, a lot of work in this field. They had a web page that was really informative on how to set up everything proper. So I learned in there exactly what the dimensions for the player character in Unreal Engine 4 are. It says 183, but I think there's a little bit of a difference between third person and first person. So depending on what template you're using, I had it originally at 180, but I think it's 183. Either way, let's just go back to 180. A little bit, a little bit more of a change in height, not much. But the width is 60 centimeters, and the length, which would be obviously the other side, 60 centimeters, complete square. Height 180 centimeters. So that's basically a little over 6 feet, about 6 feet. So that's what I use as reference. So these walls here are 250 centimeters tall. That's what I used to make this one here. To me, it's actually a pretty good height. You can make them bigger if you want. It doesn't have to be 250 centimeters, obviously. But if you want to measure actual real world wall, and like say you got blueprints and they say, hey, this wall is going to be 12 feet tall. How many centimeters go into 12 feet? Figure that out, and then you make the wall that size. You could always do editing after the fact, but you want to make sure that you kind of have a good idea. Another thing you want to keep in mind is you want to keep snaps and toggles on while you're creating things. This way they snap. If you don't have these on, they're not going to snap to the grid, and you're going to be eyeballing things all day. So you want to make sure you have that set. Sometimes it's okay to turn them off. For instance, I try not to always snap this to the grid when moving it around, just for visual purposes. So if I turn this off, I'll be able to move it around, kind of show you that, yeah, this can go in the doorway. So as, let's say, the player character is moving through, he's going through the doorway. All right, so he's able to go through with no problem. Now the character is probably a little bit smaller. This is just the outside bounding box of the collision of the character. So his head would probably be like around here, shoulders here, so he fits through that door fine. It's realistic. Again, what's good about having your grid points set up, you could also set up pivot points on each model to snap to the grid as well, which is exactly what you want to do when creating modular pieces. If you do not do this, again, they won't snap and it won't work properly. You don't want any seams in between models when snapping them together, and this is the only way that that's going to get rid of that, is when you properly snap them to the grid. So let's say that I took this and I moved it over. Okay, I don't have the snaps on, so it's not snapping. So if I go back, I click on snaps toggle, it's now changed, and then you can see this little cross that's appearing. It's snapping to grid points, because if I right click and go to snaps, that's what I have selected. I could do the vertex as well, because I have the vertexes right where the pivot point is, but it's using the pivot point right now to the grid points. So if I use vertex, even though my pivot point, let's say, was in the middle, it's going to also snap to these little corners, because those are where the vertex are. So if I go over here, these blue dots, you can barely see them, they're in the corner. Those are the vertex. Those will snap as well. So in some cases, it doesn't matter if you have grid points or vertex. You got to think, though, are you snapping your vertex to the grid point? Are you snapping your pivot point to that? They also have that as well. So depending on how you set it up, how it works for you, doesn't matter as long as it lines up and you have everything measured properly. As you can see, this is sticking out a little bit more than the actual grid. I may actually go back just for the sake of it and push it in, because I need to make these walls a little thinner, and it helps with just kind of eyeballing stuff and measurement. So you don't have to, you can. So that's what I got set up there. So I have these grid points set up. Now if I go back on the model, see that little yellow line? That's the rubber band, and that kind of shows you, okay, snap it here, it's going to turn green. It snapped perfectly. Okay, snap perfectly. So if I bring it back here, it's now snapped perfectly to the next model. Two different models. Okay, as you can see, no seams whatsoever. The only time that you'll probably see, you might see a little bit graphically here, because I don't have the best graphical setup in 3ds Max right now to get rid of that. But you will actually be able to use these together flawlessly if you set it up in a system like this. So the best way I did all these other pieces is I just took a clone of this original one right here, and then I would edit whatever I needed in the next one, doorway, window, whatever. And that way it's always measured properly. They fit. There's no issue. Another thing is you have to keep in mind is that if you do texture these, or whatever program you're in, you will get seams if the texture isn't flawlessly seamless from one model to another. So my advice is if you do texture it, even if you use a third-party program like Quixel Suite or Substance Designer, I'm not totally familiar on how those work yet, but my concept would probably be you want to make sure that when you use procedural material and texturing that they will flawlessly match whatever other piece you're putting together. Sometimes, I guess people would do it in 3ds Max and set it up in such a way so that if you put these in another program, no matter what you edit on one to another, they'll flawlessly match. So you won't see the seam where that wall is. Otherwise, if you don't know how to use those programs, keep in mind that when you texture these in 3ds Max, you might want to select all of them, or at least set it up in a way where the texture will seamlessly work with the other ones. I know there's a way to do it because I did it for another project that I had going for like streets, sidewalks, turns, crossways, things like that. I had to set up the texture properly so that when I snapped it to one or another, you wouldn't see a big seam in between the road. It doesn't look right. So I know there's a way to do it. It's been a while, so I can't remember it off the top of my head, but just keep that in mind. Also, I've set up support columns. I kind of did it for the corners because, again, I'm still learning more on this program. I wanted to know exactly how to make it go like this and like this without a support beam. I couldn't figure it out, so I figured, well, the next best thing is kind of just put a beam in there. You could put these anywhere you want, but I just put them in the corners because I figure if you're in a building and you're doing a lot of corners and hallways, you're probably having a support beam there anyway. You probably have them in the walls. You may see them, you may not. So it doesn't really matter. It's up to you. You can create them in here if you want, or if you know how to do it without it, that's great. But you could always do this for variants of each model. Put a support beam, take it out, whatever you want to do. So I have that set up as well. I'm also going to put a ceiling and floor and kind of match it up to say each section what their measurement is. I would probably take a ceiling and make it an exact square from each edge outward. And the reason I say to do that is because it will work perfectly with the modular setup. It's like Legos. So if you have a ceiling and floor that you snap above this and below it, you can use multiple pieces of that to fill in your ceilings properly and floors. This way you don't have to guess and have it set up a certain way. You can plan ahead if you want, which is always a good thing, but let's say you're kind of going on the fly and maybe you wanted to change a plan last minute and you said, well, with modular building, I can just take those and prop them up after I set up the walls, and then I can copy and paste different levels if I wanted to. But you'll always have these pieces for the ceiling and floor that will match. So no matter what you decide to plan, they'll snap together properly. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it explained a little bit more for you. And understand that using something like this, naming it obviously, for the player character will help you scale properly, and so that you're not making a bunch of assets and then realize, oh shoot, I didn't set it up properly. Another thing that I've done in my other videos, which are kind of long, was explain that, let's say you're using Revit architecture and you're using feet. I like to use feet decimals because it works best with 3ds Max and Unreal Engine 4. This way, if you decide to make a wall that's 8 feet tall, 10 feet long, when you bring it into 3ds Max, it will convert that feet into centimeters properly. It won't deform your model. It will be exactly where it's supposed to be. And it works even better because you're using decimals in 3ds Max anyway. As you can see in the corner here, that's what I'm using. Now, again, 1 centimeter equals 1 Unreal unit. So it's safe to say that when you export it out of 3ds Max, you bring it into Unreal Engine 4, you have perfect setup. So everything from Revit into 3ds Max and then Unreal Engine 4 will work properly, be measured properly, and you can go from there. Another cool thing about Revit is that usually when you create a building or an office or a small home or whatever you're creating, they'll do it in pieces because it builds it in a modular fashion. Now you can edit those in 3ds Max any way you want, but to be able to get like real windows, real doors, real walls, real roof textures and shingles and things like that from actual companies out there, they'll let you download their Revit models or their AutoCAD models and bring them into a program. So you can bring those into 3ds Max, UV light map them, UV texture them, so they work in the lighting of Unreal Engine 4, and then bring them into modular levels and just have actual windows that are perfectly measured. You could always change the width and height in Unreal Engine 4, as everybody probably knows, but you'd like to keep it as close as possible to whatever you're designing. So there's just many ways to figure out how you're going to create a building or an office, interior, exterior, even streets, whatever. But a lot of levels that you see in these games are done in a modular fashion, especially open world games. They do not have the time to sit there and make their own unique assets for just that plan and not do it in a modular fashion. One, it takes too long. Two, it takes more memory out of the game engine and your system. And a lot of these games are for consoles, so they got to think, hey, we're making them for mobile devices, consoles. We need to save as much memory as possible. We need to, time is money. So when you have pieces like this, as you can see, I've already kind of gotten rid of a lot of the edges and lines, minimized the vertices and things like that. Like right here, some of them you just kind of can't help. And it will run better in the game engine because it has less to compute. And so let's say I have this, this, and this. All the game engine has to remember is that, okay, I already know what this model looks like and what it does. I know what this does. I know what that does. All I'm doing is copying, pasting that same data in real time. I'm not recreating, computing a new model fully and putting it in a database or memory every time I see it in the game. It's already in there. So all I got to do is kind of just remember where that copy would be and put it into the game. So for the computer, it's easier to work with, and it's a lot easier for the system to compute in a game engine in real time. So if you ever notice that in games like Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, you may see different textures, you may see kind of different variants of certain models, but believe it or not, a lot of them are modular built, and that's just how things kind of work. So again, thank you for watching this video. Sorry so long. Hope I covered everything I could to help you understand. In the next video, I'm going to show you how this works in Unreal Engine 4, snapping to the grid properly, creating a modular interior, and kind of going from there. Once I learn how to UV light map better, I will also make a video for that, put it in the game so you can see when you build the light it works properly. And then when I learn Substance Designer more and Quixel Suite, I'll also texture each model in those programs to show you how you can make variants of every model. It's the same model piece but have different textures every time. I'll also show you how to do vertex painting. Vertex painting basically would be taking, let's say, 3 different versions of a texture for a model. Let's say you have a new one with new paint, new wood. The second one's more dirty, so you see dirtier paint, dirtier wood, kind of chips out of the wood, things like that. And then the third one would be really run down, like holes in the wall, indents, things like that. You'll use red, green, and blue under the vertex channels, which is what would create any picture. For instance, if you take a digital picture and bring it into Photoshop, they have red, green, and blue channels. That's what creates your picture. So when you turn one on and one off, depending on what combination you're using, you'll be able to flawlessly paint in Unreal Engine 4 or a 3D program that you use a texture that will blend in perfectly with the other textures. All that will change is the detail. So if you set it up properly, I could take a brush and paint this, a little dirt over here, a little dirt over there, over the brand new paint and texture, so it looks like there's a little bit of cracks, things like that. So you'll be able to paint in a scene complete unique versions of that model. So it works great with other programs like Quixel or Substance Designer or Painter, and a little bit of vertex painting also adds to the uniqueness of the level and models in question. So again, thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share. I appreciate all your support. I know I don't have tons of people subscribe, but I'm kind of shocked that I have this many people as is. I don't really go out there and put it out there as much as I should. So again, thank you for watching my videos. And if you have any special requests, just let me know. I'll be glad to make a tutorial for it. So again, until next time, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.